The morning Rachel disappeared, I was 31 minutes late to work because I couldn't find my car keys. I remember the number because I sat in the parking lot doing the math, trying to decide whether to text my manager or just walk in and hope nobody noticed. I texted. He didn't respond, which meant he was either busy or annoyed, and I spent the first hour at my desk waiting for the conversation that never came. That was a Wednesday in November. The kind of gray, damp Wednesday that makes everything in a small town look like it's been photocopied too many times. I work in the permits office for the village of Carlindale, a suburb south of Chicago that people pass through on their way to somewhere else. My job is to process building permits, fence permits, deck permits, and the occasional sign variance for someone trying to put a sandwich board on the sidewalk. It's not the career I imagined, but rent's due on the 1st and my car payment is due on the 15th, and the permits office has good insurance. Rachel was 3 years younger than me, 26. She lived about 40 minutes south in a rented duplex near Kankakee, and she worked at a veterinary clinic doing reception and bookkeeping. She had a cat named Diesel and a string of boyfriends who all seemed to be named either Kyle or Tyler. We weren't distant, but we weren't the kind of siblings who talked every day. We'd text maybe twice a week. Sometimes she'd send me pictures of dogs that came into the clinic, ones with absurd haircuts or missing teeth. I'd respond with the crying, laughing emoji. That was the texture of our relationship. The last text she sent me was on a Tuesday night. It said, "Can I ask you something weird tomorrow?" "Not bad weird, just weird," I replied. "Sure. Call whenever." She never called. Our mother reported her missing on Thursday. Rachel hadn't shown up for work Wednesday or Thursday, and she wasn't answering calls. Mom drove down to the duplex and found the front door locked, the lights off, Diesel sitting on the kitchen counter looking dehydrated. Rachel's car was in the driveway. Her phone was on the nightstand. Her purse was on the hook by the door. The police didn't find signs of forced entry. No blood. No note. Nothing disturbed. It was as if she'd simply stopped being there. I took the call from my mother while I was heating up leftover pasta in the office microwave. The container was too hot to hold by the time she finished telling me, and I set it on the counter and forgot about it for the rest of the day. The first 2 weeks were what you'd expect. Searches, flyers, a Facebook page my cousin set up that accumulated vague sympathies from people who barely knew Rachel. The police were polite and procedural and clearly understaffed. The detective assigned to her case was named Loomis, a tired man in his 50s who seemed to carry every unsolved file he'd ever touched somewhere in the pouches under his eyes. He asked me the standard questions. When did I last talk to her? Did she have enemies? Was there a boyfriend? Was there drug use? Did she seem depressed? Was she in debt? I answered everything honestly. I told him about the text, the one about asking me something weird, and he wrote it down without visible interest. "People text things like that all the time," he said. "Could have been about anything." He was right. It could have been. I took 3 days off work and helped Mom put up flyers in Kankakee. We covered a 4-mile radius around the duplex. Laundromats, gas stations, a Family Dollar, the parking lot of a church Rachel had never attended. Each flyer had the same photo: Rachel at a cousin's wedding the previous summer, smiling in a way that made her look more approachable than she actually was. She had a sharper face than the photo suggested, thinner lips, a way of looking at you with her left eye slightly narrower than her right, like she was permanently evaluating something. I kept working. I kept processing permits. The first week was surreal. The second week was numb. By the third week, the numbness had developed a thin crust of routine over it, and I could almost function normally as long as nobody asked how I was doing. Then I found the jacket. It was a Saturday, early December. I was cleaning out the back seat of my car, something I do maybe twice a year when the accumulation of receipts and fast food napkins becomes structurally unsound. Wedged between the seat and the door, under a crumpled Wendy's bag, I found a denim jacket. It was Rachel's. I knew it immediately. She'd bought it at a thrift store in Joliet the previous spring, and been unreasonably proud of it, something about the stitching on the collar being vintage. She'd shown it to me over FaceTime, holding it up and rotating it like a QVC host. I'd said it looked like a jacket. I sat in the driveway holding it, trying to remember when she'd been in my car. She hadn't. Not recently. The last time Rachel had physically been in my car was in August, when I'd driven us both to a family cookout at our uncle's place in Lockport. That was over 3 months before she disappeared. I'd cleaned the car at least once since then, I remembered, because I'd found a parking ticket I'd forgotten about and had to pay a late fee. The jacket hadn't been there in August. Rachel hadn't owned it yet in August. I sat with this for a while. Then I folded the jacket and brought it inside and put it on the kitchen table and stared at it while I ate cereal for dinner. There were explanations. Maybe she'd left it at Mom's and Mom had put it in my car without mentioning it. Maybe I'd borrowed it at some point and forgotten. Maybe someone had placed it there, a friend of Rachel's, returning something and getting the wrong car. But the car had been locked. I always lock the car. It's the one compulsive thing I do without thinking, the way some people always check the stove. I didn't call the police. I didn't call Mom. I told myself it wasn't important, not in the context of a missing person. A jacket in a car was not a lead. It was a minor domestic mystery, the kind that would resolve itself later with a simple explanation I'd feel stupid for not thinking of. I put the jacket in my closet. Then, about an hour later, I took it back out and hung it on the hook by my front door where I keep my own coat. I don't know why I did that. Detective Loomis called me the following Tuesday. He said they'd found no significant leads. Rachel's phone record showed normal activity up until the day she disappeared. Text to coworkers, a call to a nail salon to cancel an appointment, a DoorDash order that was delivered and apparently eaten. Her bank account showed no withdrawals after Monday night. Her car had no GPS. There was no security camera footage from the duplex or the immediate area. He asked me if I'd thought of anything else. I said no. He said they were still working the case, but wanted to be honest that these kinds of disappearances, adults without obvious foul play, no witnesses, no digital trail, were the hardest to solve. He said he'd be in touch. After he hung up, I sat at my desk and stared at a fence permit application for 11 minutes without reading a single word. That night, I went through my phone. Not for any particular reason, just scrolling. I opened my photos and started flipping backward through the camera roll. Mostly it was what you'd expect. Screenshots of memes. A picture of a crack in my bathroom ceiling I'd taken to show my landlord. A blurry photo of a sunset I thought was worth capturing and wasn't. Then I found a photo I didn't remember taking. It was dark, almost entirely black, with a faint gray shape in the lower right that could have been anything. A wall, a piece of furniture, the edge of a car door. The timestamp said it was taken at 11:47 p.m. on the Tuesday before Rachel disappeared. The Tuesday she'd texted me about wanting to ask me something weird. I checked my location history. I keep it turned on because I once lost my phone at a Target and found it using the tracking feature. According to Google, at 11:47 p.m. on that Tuesday, my phone was at home. My apartment, where I would have been sleeping. But I don't take pictures in my sleep. I zoomed in on the photo. The gray shape didn't become any clearer. There was nothing identifiable in it. I told myself I'd probably opened the camera accidentally, hit the shutter while rolling over in bed. It happens. Phones are sensitive. Bodies are clumsy. I deleted the photo and went to bed. Then I lay there for 45 minutes, got up, opened my recently deleted folder, and restored it. I want to be clear about something. At this point, I was not suspicious of myself. I was grieving. I was confused. I was anxious in the low-grade, persistent way that a missing sibling generates, not the sharp anxiety of a crisis, but the dull anxiety of not knowing, of waiting for a phone call that could be either relief or devastation. The jacket and the photo were oddities, but life is full of oddities. I once found a fork in my coat pocket with no memory of putting it there. People misplace things, people forget small actions. The brain edits constantly, trimming away moments it considers unimportant. That's what I told myself. The next thing happened 4 days later. I was doing laundry, hauling a basket down to the shared machines in the basement of my building. The basement is unfinished, concrete floor, exposed pipes, the kind of dim fluorescent lighting that makes everyone look like they're recovering from surgery. I loaded the washer, started it, and then noticed something on the floor near the drain. It was a hair tie. Purple. The kind with a little metal clasp. Rachel used purple hair ties. She'd been using them since high school, always purple, always that specific brand from CVS. I'd given her a 10-pack as a stocking stuffer the previous Christmas as a joke. I picked it up. It was slightly damp. There was a single long brown hair wrapped around it. Rachel had brown hair. I lived alone in the building's only one-bedroom unit. The other tenants were a retired couple on the second floor and a woman in her 40s on the third floor who had short blonde hair and, to my knowledge, had never interacted with my sister. I stood in the basement holding the hair tie, listening to the washing machine fill. The fluorescent light above me buzzed at a frequency that seemed to vibrate somewhere behind my left eye. I put the hair tie in my pocket. I went upstairs. I sat on my couch and placed it on the coffee table next to the TV remote. There was an explanation for this. Someone could have tracked it in on their shoe. It could have fallen from a piece of clothing. It could have been there for weeks and I simply hadn't noticed. I do laundry in that basement every week and I don't inspect the floor each time. These were reasonable thoughts, but the feeling underneath them was not reasonable. The feeling was more like standing at the edge of a very deep hole and hearing something shift at the bottom. I started checking things. Not deliberately at first. It was more like a reflex that developed over the following days. I'd open my phone and scroll through my photos again, looking for images I didn't recognize. I'd check my location history, scanning for anomalies. I'd go through my recent calls, my text messages, my browser history. On December 14th, I found a gap in my location history. A 3-hour window on the night of November 15th, 4 days before Rachel disappeared, during which Google had no data for my phone. Between 10:22 p.m. and 1:36 a.m., the timeline was simply blank. No location, no movement, nothing. This could mean my phone was turned off, or dead, or in airplane mode, but I don't turn my phone off. I charge it every night on the nightstand. The battery log showed it at 73% at 10 p.m. and 68% at 2 a.m., which meant it was on and functioning. The location data was simply absent. I stared at the gap for a long time, as though it might fill itself in if I waited. Then I checked the night. Rachel disappeared the night of November 18th, the Tuesday. No gap. My phone was at my apartment all night. The location history was continuous and unremarkable. But November 15th, a Friday. What had I done that Friday? I couldn't remember. This wasn't unusual in itself. I can barely remember what I did last Thursday, and that was 3 days ago. Fridays tend to blur together. I probably came home from work, heated something up, watched something, went to bed. That's most Fridays. But most Fridays don't have 3-hour gaps in my location data. I checked my bank records. On November 15th, I'd made one purchase, $7.42 at a gas station in Carlindale at 5:48 p.m. That was it. No evening transactions, no late-night fast food, nothing that placed me anywhere. The absence of evidence is not evidence, I told myself. This was a sentence I'd read somewhere, and I repeated it, like a small, unsatisfying prayer. I want to describe what it's like to suspect yourself of something you have no memory of doing. It doesn't start with fear. It starts with a strange, almost intellectual curiosity, like solving a puzzle about someone else. You look at the evidence and think, that's odd, the way you'd think it about a character in a movie. There's a distance. You are the investigator, and the subject of the investigation happens to share your name and your body, but the two roles feel temporarily separate. Then the distance collapses, usually at night, usually when you're trying to sleep. And what replaces it is not exactly fear. It's more like nausea, a deep intestinal wrongness, as though your body knows something your mind hasn't accepted yet. I started sleeping badly. I'd wake up at 2 or 3 a.m. with the specific crystalline alertness that only comes from being yanked out of sleep by something urgent, except there was nothing urgent. The apartment was quiet. The street outside was quiet. The only sound was the refrigerator and my own breathing, and I'd lie there cataloging both, waiting for something to be different. Nothing was ever different. But I started leaving my bedroom door closed at night, which I'd never done before. And I started checking the lock before bed, not once like I normally would, but 3 times, pressing the deadbolt with my thumb to feel it seated in the frame. It occurred to me, during one of these rituals, that I was locking the door as though trying to keep something in rather than out. Christmas was terrible, but not in any dramatic way. Mom hosted as usual at the house in Orland Park where Rachel and I grew up. The house smelled like her cinnamon candles and the specific brand of cleaning spray she's used since 1998. Our aunt and uncle came. Our cousin Meg came with her husband and their 2 small children. Nobody mentioned Rachel's name for the first 40 minutes. Then Mom said, quietly, while transferring mashed potatoes into a serving bowl, "I keep thinking she's going to walk in." And after that, people talked about her in small, careful portions, like passing around a dish nobody wanted to drop. I ate and smiled and answered questions about work. I told Meg her kids were getting big. I helped clear the table. I stood in the kitchen drying dishes and looking out the window at the backyard, where Rachel and I used to stage elaborate, rule-confused games that were partly tag, partly some imagined quest that only she understood. My mother hugged me before I left and held on for a long time. When she pulled back, her eyes were dry, but her face had the particular stillness of someone who has been crying earlier and is determined not to cry now. "Drive safe," she said. "Text me when you get home." I drove home. I texted her. Then I sat in the parking lot of my building for 20 minutes because I didn't want to go inside. When I finally went in, I noticed something on the kitchen counter that I was certain I hadn't left there. It was a coffee mug, white, with a small chip on the rim. It wasn't mine. It was Rachel's, from her duplex. I recognized it because she'd chipped it while washing dishes during a phone call with me and had narrated the entire tragedy in real time. "My favorite mug," she'd said. "The one that's the perfect size. Destroyed. I'm devastated." She was being dramatic. The chip was tiny. The mug was sitting on my counter, empty, dry, positioned near the sink as though someone had just finished washing it. I hadn't been to Rachel's duplex since before she disappeared. I hadn't taken anything from it. Mom had been the one to collect Rachel's belongings, or some of them. The rest were still in the duplex, which was still leased in Rachel's name, the landlord apparently willing to wait. I picked up the mug and turned it over. The chip was there, exactly where Rachel had described it, right side, near the handle. I ran my thumb over it. Then I opened every cabinet, every drawer, every closet in my apartment. I checked the windows, all locked. I checked the front door, locked, deadbolt engaged. I checked the basement door, the shared hallway, and the building's back entrance. Everything was secured. Nobody had been in my apartment, which meant either I had brought the mug home and didn't remember it, or the mug had arrived by a mechanism that didn't require doors or windows. The second option was not something I was prepared to consider. I called my mother. I asked her as casually as I could manage whether she'd given me anything from Rachel's place. A mug, maybe, or anything. "No," she said. "Why?" I found a mug I thought might be hers." "Oh," a pause. "Maybe she left it at your place sometime." "Yeah," I said. "Probably. But Rachel hadn't visited my apartment in months, and the mug hadn't been there yesterday." I washed the mug and put it in the cabinet next to my own mugs. I don't know why I washed it. It was already clean. In January, I started keeping a list. This felt necessary. The individual items, jacket, photo, hair tie, location, gap, mug, could each be explained separately, but collectively they formed a shape I didn't want to look at. Writing them down was a way of externalizing the shape, putting it on paper where it could be examined objectively. I bought a composition notebook, the kind with the black and white marbled cover, from the Walgreens near my office. I wrote the date of each event and a brief description. Seeing them arranged chronologically made them look more deliberate, more like a pattern. I also started checking my car more carefully. Every morning before work, I'd do a quick scan of the interior, back seat, trunk, glove compartment. I didn't know what I was looking for, I just felt compelled to look. On January 8th, I found a receipt in the passenger side door pocket. It was from a gas station in Kankakee, the BP on Court Street, about 6 blocks from Rachel's duplex. The date was November 17th, 2 days before Rachel disappeared. The purchase was for $34.60 in gas, paid with a debit card ending in the last 4 digits of my card number. I checked my bank records. There was no transaction on November 17th at that gas station, or any gas station. My record showed a purchase at a Subway in Carlindale at 12:15 p.m. and nothing else for that day. The receipt was real. I could feel the thermal paper between my fingers, slightly waxy, the ink already fading at the edges. But my bank said the transaction didn't exist. I drove to the BP on Court Street the following Saturday. I don't know what I expected to find. The station was ordinary, a small lot, 2 pump islands, a convenience store with a bored attendant behind bulletproof glass. I went inside and bought a bottle of water, and as I was paying, I asked the attendant if they had security cameras. "Yeah," he said, "but they only keep like 2 weeks, maybe 3. November 17th was nearly 2 months ago. Whatever the cameras might have shown was gone. I sat in the parking lot and looked at the receipt again. Then I looked at the street. Rachel's duplex was 6 blocks north. I could have driven there in 3 minutes. What was I doing in Kankakee on November 17th? I didn't know. I had no memory of it. None. But the receipt existed. It was in my hand. I need to explain something about memory, or at least about my memory, because it became important. I have always had a slightly unreliable memory. Not in any clinical sense, nothing that's ever been diagnosed or treated, but I've always been the person who forgets where they put things, who walks into a room and can't remember why, who has to be reminded of conversations they participated in. Rachel used to tease me about it. "You have the memory of a concussed goldfish," she'd say, and I'd say, "That's not a thing." And she'd say, "Exactly, you forgot what goldfish are." This was a joke. But underneath jokes like that, there's always a small, sharp truth. The point is, I was already someone who didn't entirely trust his own recall. So when I couldn't remember being in Kankakee, or taking a photo at midnight, or acquiring Rachel's mug, the simplest explanation was that I had done these things and simply not encoded them. Stress does that. Grief does that. My brain was processing a trauma, and some of the routine data was being dropped. That was the rational explanation, and for a while I held onto it with both hands. But the rational explanation required me to believe that I had driven 40 minutes to my missing sister's town 2 days before she disappeared, bought gas 6 blocks from her home, and then completely forgotten the trip. Not suppressed it, not pushed it down, but genuinely had no memory of it at all. I am not a psychologist, but I know enough to know that that kind of total amnesia for a voluntary action is not normal grief processing. It's something else. I didn't like thinking about what the something else might be. The notebook grew. January 12th. Found a pair of gloves in my coat closet that I didn't recognize. Gray wool. Women's size. When I showed them to Mom, she said they looked like ones Rachel had. January 19th. My odometer showed 847 more miles than I expected based on my commute and errands. I'd been loosely tracking it since the gas receipt. 847 miles is approximately 10 round trips to Kankakee. January 23rd. A neighbor in the building, Mrs. Kowalski, the retired woman on the 2nd floor, mentioned in passing that she'd heard me coming and going late several times in the past few weeks. I asked her what time. She said 2, 3 in the morning. I told her it must have been someone else. She gave me a look that was patient and slightly pitying, the way you'd look at someone who just said something obviously untrue. January the 28th. I found dried mud on my boots, the specific orange-red clay mud that's common in the Kankakee area but doesn't exist anywhere near Carlindale. Each item went into the notebook. Each one had an explanation. Each explanation was slightly less convincing than the one before it. And underneath all of them, growing like something rooted in my chest, was a question I couldn't ask anyone. What if I'm doing something at night that I don't remember? February. I bought a cheap security camera, the kind with a motion sensor that records to a memory card, and set it up in my bedroom, aimed at the door. If I was sleepwalking or whatever it was, I wanted to see it. The first 3 nights, nothing. The camera recorded me sleeping, a motionless lump under a comforter. The frame so boring I had to fast forward through hours of it. On the 4th night, February 3rd, the motion sensor activated at 1:14 a.m. In the footage, I sit up. Not groggily the way you'd sit up if you were stirred from sleep. Smoothly, deliberately, like someone who was already awake and had simply been lying still. I swing my legs off the bed, stand, and walk out of the frame. The bedroom door, which I'd closed and which I could see clearly in the camera's infrared view, opened, and then quietly closed. The camera's motion sensor didn't activate again until 4:22 a.m., when the door reopened and I walked back in. I removed my shoes. I was wearing shoes, which meant I'd put them on somewhere outside the bedroom, set them by the bed, and got under the covers and lay still. Within 2 minutes, the regular rhythm of sleep breathing was visible in the slight movement of the comforter. I watched this footage on my phone during my lunch break the next day, sitting in my car in the office parking lot. I watched it 4 times. On the 3rd viewing, I noticed something I'd missed. Before leaving the room, I paused at the dresser and picked something up. I couldn't tell what it was. The infrared image was grainy and the object was small, but the motion was confident. I knew exactly where the object was and reached for it without looking. I went home that night and checked the dresser. Everything seemed normal. My wallet, my watch, a small dish where I keep loose change, and my car keys. My car keys. I went outside and checked the car. The driver's seat was pushed back slightly further than I usually set it, but that could have been my imagination. The gas tank was about a quarter tank, lower than I remembered, but I hadn't been paying close attention. I checked the odometer. I'd marked it that morning. 74,312. It now read 74,396. 84 miles. The round-trip distance from Carlindale to Kankakee is approximately 82 miles. I should have called someone. A doctor, the police, my mother, anyone. I know that now, and I knew it then. The rational thing to do was to seek help, medical help, for what appeared to be a parasomnia or a dissociative episode, or legal help for what appeared to be evidence that I was visiting the area where my sister disappeared without any conscious awareness of it. But I didn't call anyone. I want to explain why, even though the explanation doesn't make me look good. If I called a doctor, the doctor would want to know why I was concerned. I'd have to explain the evidence. The jacket, the mug, the receipt, the mileage, the camera footage. And once I said those things out loud, they would become real in a way they currently weren't. Right now, they existed in a liminal space, observed but unspoken, cataloged but not interpreted. Speaking them would force an interpretation, and every interpretation I could think of was unbearable. If I called the police, Detective Loomis would want to know why I hadn't reported these things earlier. He'd look at the timeline, my sister's belongings appearing in my possession, a receipt from her town, nocturnal trips I couldn't account for, and he would not see a confused brother. He would see a suspect. And I would become a suspect, and my mother would learn that I was a suspect, and the thin, fragile structure of our family's ability to function would come apart. And underneath both of those reasons was a third one, which I couldn't articulate at the time, but which I think was the most powerful. I didn't want to find out what I was doing, because I was afraid that finding out would make it real in a way that would end something, my freedom, my identity, my understanding of who I am. So I did what people do when they're afraid of the answer. I kept investigating privately, as though I could solve it on my own terms, as though the truth would be gentler if I discovered it myself. I set up a second camera in the hallway, and a third in the kitchen, facing the front door. On the night of February 6th, the cameras recorded the following: 1:07. I exit the bedroom, dressed in jeans, a sweatshirt, and boots. I am carrying my car keys and my wallet. 1:08 a.m. I unlock the front door, step into the hallway, and close the door behind me. I do not lock it. 4:51 a.m. I return. I enter the apartment, lock the door behind me. I am carrying a plastic bag. I go into the kitchen, open the bag, and remove something that I place in the cabinet under the sink. The camera angle does not clearly show what the object is. 4:53 a.m. I return to the bedroom, remove my boots, and get into bed. The next morning, I checked under the kitchen sink. Behind the dish soap and a box of garbage bags, I found a small cardboard box, the kind you'd get from a post office. Inside the box was a silver bracelet. I recognized it. It was the bracelet our grandmother had given Rachel for her 16th birthday. Rachel wore it constantly. She'd been wearing it in the photo on the missing person flyer. I held the bracelet, and my hands were shaking, though not from cold. The clasp was intact, no damage, no sign it had been forcibly removed. I put the bracelet back in the box. I put the box back under the sink. Then I went to the bathroom and vomited, not dramatically, just a thin, acidic heave that left me kneeling on the tile with my forehead against the cool porcelain of the bowl. When I was done, I washed my face and went to work. For the next week, I did not watch the camera footage. The cameras recorded every night, and every morning I saw the notification that motion had been detected, and I did not open the app. I ate breakfast, I drove to work, I processed permits, I came home, I cooked dinner or ordered food. I watched television without absorbing any of it. I went to bed, and every night, based on the motion notifications, I got up and left. I knew this the way you know something you refuse to look at directly from the periphery, from the shape of its shadow. The notifications were there each morning. The mileage crept up. Once I found a leaf stuck to the bottom of my boot that looked like the kind of leaf that grows on the ornamental pears they planted along Rachel Street in Kankakee. I was losing weight. Not rapidly, but steadily. The kind of loss that comes from forgetting to eat full meals and sleeping poorly and carrying a constant low-level dread that burns calories the way a fever does. My clothes started fitting differently. My face looked sharper in the bathroom mirror, the bones more prominent. My coworker Diane asked me if I was okay. I said I was fine. She looked at me the way Mrs. Kowalski had looked at me, that patient, pitying look, and said, "You know you can talk to me, right?" I said I knew. I did not talk to her. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, absurdly, I came home from work and found something that finally broke through the wall I'd built between myself and the footage. On my kitchen table was a photograph. A physical photograph printed on glossy paper, the kind you'd get from a one-hour photo lab. It showed Rachel's duplex, photographed from the sidewalk at night. The lights were off. The street was empty. The angle was slightly tilted, as though the person holding the camera hadn't been paying full attention to framing. In the lower right corner of the image, barely visible, was the reflected shape of the person taking the photo, captured in the glass of a parked car's window. The shape was mine, my height, my build. The sweatshirt I recognized from the camera footage. I was standing outside my missing sister's home in the middle of the night taking pictures. I sat down. I pulled the notebook from the kitchen drawer where I kept it and added the photograph to the list. Then I sat there and read through every entry, from the jacket to the photo, and I tried to see the shape of it. The whole shape. Here is what the evidence showed. I had been visiting Kankakee at night, repeatedly, without conscious memory of these visits. I had been collecting Rachel's belongings and bringing them back to my apartment. I had been photographing her home. The visits appeared to have begun before she disappeared and continued after. There were two ways to interpret this. The first was that I was experiencing a severe dissociative condition, sleepwalking combined with complex automatic behavior, and that my nocturnal visits were a grief response, my unconscious mind returning to the place where Rachel had last existed, gathering her things as a form of psychological self-soothing. This was the clinical interpretation. It was frightening but manageable. It implied a treatable condition. The second interpretation was worse. The second interpretation was that I had done something to Rachel during one of these fugue states, and that the belongings in my apartment were not souvenirs of grief, but evidence of something I could not allow myself to remember. I sat with the second interpretation for a very long time. I sat with it until the kitchen got dark because I hadn't turned on the lights, and I sat with it after that, in the dark, listening to the refrigerator and the sound of traffic on the street below. Then I opened the camera app and watched the footage I'd been avoiding. 7 nights of footage, each one essentially the same. I get up, I dress, I leave, I return hours later, sometimes carrying something, sometimes not. The movements are calm, purposeful, unhurried. There is nothing in my body language that suggests distress or confusion. I look like a person running an errand. But on the footage from February 11th, something was different. I returned at 3:48 a.m. As usual, I came in through the front door and locked it behind me. But instead of going to the kitchen or the bedroom, I walked to the hallway camera, looked directly into it, and stood there for 6 minutes. I stared into the camera with an expression I can only describe as patient. Not angry, not confused, not blank. Patient, like someone waiting for a person to understand something obvious. Then I reached up and adjusted the camera angle, tilted it slightly downward, and walked away. I checked. The camera was, in fact, tilted slightly downward from where I'd originally positioned it. I had noticed this a few days ago and assumed the mount had loosened. It hadn't loosened. I had moved it. Why? What was the version of me that existed at 3:48 a.m., trying to show the version of me that existed during the day? I looked at what the adjusted angle now captured. Before the tilt, the camera showed the hallway from chest height. After the tilt, it showed the floor. Specifically, it showed the floorboards near the bathroom door. There was nothing remarkable about them. Standard hardwood, slightly scuffed, a small gap between 2 boards where the wood had contracted. I got down on my hands and knees and looked. In the gap between the boards, wedged so tightly that you'd never notice it from a standing position, was a folded piece of paper. I used a butter knife to pry it out. It was small, maybe 2 inches by 3 inches when folded. When I unfolded it, I found handwriting. Rachel's handwriting. I knew it the way you know a sibling's handwriting, not from analyzing the letters but from the general impression, the slight leftward slant, the way she connected her R's to the next letter without lifting the pen. The note said, "I know what you do at night. I've known for years. We need to talk about it before it gets worse. Please. R." The paper was creased and soft, as though it had been folded and unfolded many times. The ink was slightly smeared in one corner. I read it 7 times. Then I put it on the kitchen table, next to the photograph of Rachel's duplex and the notebook and all the other artifacts of whatever this was, and I understood that I was standing at the edge of something I could not come back from. Rachel knew. Before she disappeared, she knew I did something at night. She had known for years. She had wanted to talk about it. "Can I ask you something weird tomorrow?" Not bad weird, just weird. This was what she'd wanted to ask. The implications multiplied in my head like cells dividing. If Rachel knew I had nocturnal episodes, how did she know? Had she witnessed one? Had I visited her before, years ago, long before she went missing? Had this been happening my entire adult life or longer? And if she'd known for years and wanted to talk about it, why hadn't she said something sooner? What had changed? What had she seen that made it urgent? I went back to the note. Before it gets worse. What did that mean? Worse how? More frequent, more dangerous. And the largest question, the one that sat in the center of everything else like a weight. Had she asked me? Had we talked? Had the nocturnal version of me received her message, driven to Kankakee, and had the conversation she wanted to have? And if so, what happened during that conversation? I called in sick to work the next day. I drove to Kankakee. It was a gray morning, temperature in the low 30s, the kind of cold that doesn't bite but settles into your joints. I parked on Rachel's Street and sat in the car looking at the duplex. It looked the same as it always had, a squat brick building with a chain-link fence and a brown lawn and with 2 front doors, one for each unit. Rachel's unit was on the right. The curtains were drawn, the porch light was off. I had a key. Mom had given me a copy weeks ago in case I needed to check on things or pick up mail. I'd never used it. I let myself in. The apartment smelled stale. Not rotting. There was no food left out, no garbage, but stale, the way a space smells when it hasn't been occupied or ventilated in months. Dust on the surfaces. A thin layer of grime on the kitchen faucet. Diesel, the cat, was gone. Mom had taken him. Everything was more or less as the police had described. Dishes in the drying rack, a book face down on the arm of the couch, some paperback thriller I didn't recognize. The bedroom was tidy, bed made, closet organized. I walked through slowly, not sure what I was looking for. The apartment felt like a held breath. Every object was exactly where Rachel had left it, on the last day she was herself, in this space, being a person. I checked her desk, a laptop. The police had examined it and returned it. A stack of junk mail, a small dish of paper clips, a framed photo of the 2 of us at age 12 and 9, standing in the backyard in Orland Park, squinting into the sun. In the desk drawer, I found a notebook. Not like my notebook. Hers was a spiral-bound, college-ruled, with a green cover. I opened it. The first several pages were grocery lists, to-do list, phone numbers, normal ephemera, but about a third of the way through the entries changed. Rachel had been keeping a log. The first dated entry was from nearly 2 years before she disappeared. March 4th, M called at 2 a.m. Sounded normal but didn't remember calling in the morning. 3rd time this month. M. My name is Martin. March 17th. M showed up at my door at 1:30 a.m. I thought something was wrong, but he just stood there, asked if I was okay. Seemed confused when I asked why he was here. Left after about 10 minutes. April 2nd. Happened again. 3 a.m. He knocked, and when I answered, he said, "I wanted to make sure you were still here." Exact words. I asked, still here versus what? He didn't answer. He looked at me like he was checking something. Then he left. April 2nd, later. Called M this afternoon. He doesn't remember coming over. I told him what happened. He laughed it off. Said I was dreaming. I wasn't dreaming. I was fully awake. I watched him drive away. I turned the pages. The entries continued, sporadic but persistent, spanning months. Rachel had documented everything. June 19th. M came at 2:15 a.m. Didn't knock this time. I heard him on the porch. Looked out the window and he was sitting on the steps facing the street. Sat there for almost an hour. Then got in his car and left. Didn't try to come in. August 8th. It's been a while since the last one. Thought maybe it stopped. Then tonight, 12:45 a.m., he was outside again. This time he walked around the building. I watched from the bedroom window. He checked all the windows, tried the back door, locked, then went back to the car and sat for 20 minutes. Then left. September 14th. I know this sounds insane, but I think he's been inside. I found the back door unlocked when I came home from work. Nothing was taken, nothing was moved. But the apartment smelled like his soap. That cedar soap he uses. It was faint, but I know it. October 3rd. He was here again last night. I pretended to be asleep. Heard the front door open. How? I changed the lock. I heard him walk through the apartment. He stopped in the bedroom doorway. I could hear him breathing. He stood there for a long time. Then he left. October 3rd. Later. I'm not scared. That's the thing. I should be scared. Someone is entering my home in the middle of the night and standing over me while I sleep. But it's Martin. I know his breathing. I know his footsteps. And whatever he's doing, he's not hurting me. He's checking on me. But why? And why doesn't he remember? November 1st. It's getting worse. He came 3 times this week. Last time he sat on the edge of my bed and put his hand on my shoulder and said something I couldn't hear. I said, "What?" And he said, "I just need to know you're safe." His voice was strange, flat, like he was reciting something. Then he left, and in the morning I texted him and he said he slept great and asked what was new. November 9th. I need to talk to him, really talk to him, face to face, during the day when he's himself. Whatever this is, it's escalating. He's visiting more often and staying longer, and I'm afraid that one night he's going to do something he can't undo and won't remember doing. November 12th. I don't know how to start the conversation. Hey, you've been breaking into my apartment at night for 2 years and you don't know you're doing it. Isn't exactly casual, but I have to try. I'm going to text him, set something up. November 15th. He was here again, brought something this time, left a bag of groceries on my counter. Milk, bread, the specific brand of yogurt I buy. He knows my groceries. He put them away in the right places. I found them in the morning, like I'd done my own shopping in my sleep. November 15th, the date of the gap in my location history, the date of the gas receipt from Kankakee. November 18th. I'm going to text him tonight, ask to talk tomorrow. I've written out what I want to say. I have dates, times, everything in this notebook. I just need him to listen and believe me, and go see a doctor or a specialist or someone who can help. November 18th, the night she texted me. Can I ask you something weird tomorrow? The entries stopped there. There was nothing after November 18th. The rest of the notebook was blank. I sat on Rachel's couch with the notebook open on my lap, and the room was very quiet, and I could hear the blood moving through my own head. For 2 years, the nocturnal version of me had been visiting my sister, checking on her, making sure she was safe, bringing her groceries, standing in her bedroom doorway, watching her sleep. It sounded like protection. It looked like obsession. And on the night she'd finally decided to confront me about it, or rather, on the night she'd texted to set up that confrontation, she disappeared. The note I'd found in my floorboard was proof that she'd tried to reach me. The message, sent through whatever channel the nocturnal version of me operated on, left, in a place only he would find, wedged into a crack only visible from the angle he'd adjusted the camera to reveal. She had tried to communicate with both versions of me simultaneously. The daytime Martin, via text. The nighttime Martin, via a note hidden in my apartment, presumably placed there during one of my unconscious visits and then transported home. Daytime Martin never got the chance to respond. Rachel disappeared before the phone call happened. Nighttime Martin. What had he done? I drove home with the green notebook on the passenger seat. I drove carefully, under the speed limit, because my hands were unsteady and my vision kept narrowing in a way that suggested I was not entirely present behind the wheel. At home, I laid everything out on the kitchen table. My notebook, Rachel's notebook, the jacket, the gloves, the bracelet, the mug, the receipt, the photograph, the note, the camera footage queued up on my phone. All of it. The complete collection. I looked at the evidence the way Detective Loomis would look at it. A man visits his sister's home repeatedly at night without conscious knowledge. He enters her apartment. He watches her sleep. He brings her things. He takes her things. This behavior escalates over 2 years. She decides to confront him about it. She disappears the same night. Her belongings subsequently appear in his home. It was not a complicated story. A jury would not struggle with it, but the story had a hole. The same hole that had been there since the beginning, the one the police couldn't fill. There was no evidence of harm, no blood, no forced entry, no signs of struggle, no body. Rachel had simply ceased to exist. And the belongings that appeared in my apartment, the jacket, the mug, the bracelet, they weren't trophies. They were the things a person would bring home if they were trying to preserve someone, if they were gathering the pieces of a person who was dissolving and trying to hold them together. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen with the lights on and waited. I don't have a clear memory of what happened next, and I want to be honest about that. I know that at some point in the early morning hours, 2 and maybe 3 a.m., I was no longer sitting at the kitchen table. I was standing. I was putting on my boots. I was picking up my keys, and I was aware of it. Not in the way I'm aware of things during the day. It was more like watching myself from a slight distance, a few inches behind my own eyes, observing the movements of my body as it prepared to leave. There was no panic, no urgency. The feeling was closer to settling into a current, like wading into a river and allowing it to take my weight. I drove to Kankakee. I know this because the odometer confirmed it later, and because the next clear memory I have is of standing on Rachel's porch at approximately 3:30 a.m., key in hand. But this time, for the first time, I was there. Conscious, present. The membrane between daytime Martin and nighttime Martin had thinned to the point of transparency, and I could feel both of them, both of me, operating simultaneously, like 2 radio stations bleeding into each other on the same frequency. I unlocked the door and went inside. The apartment was dark. The stale smell was the same. But something was different. It took me a moment to identify it. The air was warmer than it should have been. Not by a lot, just a few degrees. As though a heater had been running, or as though someone's body heat had been accumulating in the closed space. I walked through the apartment. Kitchen, living room, bathroom. Each room was empty and undisturbed. I stopped at the bedroom door. It was closed. It had been open when I'd visited during the day. I opened it. The room was dark. The curtains were drawn. The bed was made, exactly as I'd seen it hours earlier. But on the bed, arranged in a neat line down the center of the comforter, were objects. A hair tie, purple. A receipt from the BP on Court Street. A photograph of Rachel at 12, squinting into the sun. A silver bracelet. A note, folded small, in Rachel's handwriting. And at the foot of the bed, a second note. This one in my handwriting. My handwriting. But not the letters were slightly more angular, the spacing slightly wider, as though written by a hand that was mine but operating under different instructions. The note said, "She's not gone. She's distributed. I've been collecting her. You need to stop looking for a body and start understanding what happened. The pieces are the point. She asked you to listen." Listen. I sat on the edge of Rachel's bed and read the note 3 times. The apartment was silent. The warmth was still there, faint, ambient, sourceless, like the memory of a presence rather than the presence itself. She's not gone. She's distributed. I thought about the bracelet in my cabinet, the jacket on my hook, the mug next to my mugs, the gloves in my closet, the hair tie on my coffee table, all of Rachel's things scattered through my apartment, like pieces of a person seeded into the spaces of my life. I thought about the nighttime Martin, The version of me who had spent 2 years visiting Rachel, checking on her, watching over her with a devotion that my daytime self couldn't access or remember. A version of me that knew something I didn't, that operated on information my conscious mind had never received. And I thought about Rachel's last log entry. I'm afraid that one night he's going to do something he can't undo. What if the thing I'd done, wasn't what I'd feared? What if it wasn't violence? What if it was something stranger and more complete than that? I drove home as the sun was coming up. The sky was the color of dishwater, fading to a pale, unconvincing yellow at the eastern horizon. I drove with the windows down despite the cold, because I wanted the sensation of the air on my face, something external and verifiable. At home, I walked through the apartment and looked at Rachel's things. The jacket on the hook, the mug in the cabinet, the bracelet under the sink, each object in its place, integrated into my domestic landscape so naturally that a visitor wouldn't know they didn't belong to me. I thought about what distributed meant. In computing, a distributed system is one where components are spread across multiple locations, but function as a unified whole. No single node contains the complete system. The system exists in the connections between the nodes. That's a metaphor. I know it's a metaphor, but it was the only framework I had for what the note was suggesting. Rachel wasn't in her apartment. Rachel wasn't in a grave or a basement or a river. Rachel was in pieces, her belongings, her presence, the warmth in her apartment that shouldn't have been there, the hair tie on the laundry room floor, the handwriting on a note wedged into my floorboards. She was distributed across the spaces of my life, maintained and circulated by a version of me that operated below consciousness. This is insane. I know it's insane. I knew it then. But the alternative that I had harmed my sister in a fugue state and was now constructing an elaborate metaphysical fantasy to avoid the truth was somehow less convincing. Because I had looked at the evidence. I had looked at it carefully, and there was no evidence of harm, no blood anywhere, no defensive wounds on my body, no disturbed scene, no witnesses to anything violent, just absence and objects and a warmth that shouldn't have been. In the weeks that followed, I stopped fighting the nighttime episodes. I stopped setting up cameras. I stopped checking the odometer. I stopped keeping the notebook. This was not a decision I made all at once. It was more like a gradual relaxation of resistance, the way you stop bracing against a wave once you realize it's going to carry you regardless. The nighttime Martin continued his routine. I'd wake in the morning with mud on my boots or a new object on the counter, a book of Rachel's, a scarf, a framed photo that had been on her bedroom wall. Each item would find its place in my apartment without my conscious intervention. I'd come home from work and find the photo hung on a nail I didn't remember hammering, the scarf draped over the back of a chair I didn't remember moving. My apartment was slowly becoming a composite. Half mine, half Rachel's. Our things interleaved like shuffled cards. And something was changing in me, in the daytime me. The sharp edge of grief was dulling, but not in the way grief normally dulls through time and distance. It was dulling because the absence was being filled. Rachel was everywhere. Her things were my things. Her spaces were my spaces. The division between her life and mine was eroding, and in its place was something that felt, against all reason, like closeness. I know how that sounds. Mom called in March. She sounded tired but composed. The police don't have anything new, she said. Loomis says they're keeping the case open, but... She trailed off. The unfinished sentence carried its own weight. I know, I said. Martin, are you okay? You sound different. Different how? I don't know. Calmer. That's not a complaint. She paused. You seem like you've settled into something. I'm managing, I said. Okay. Another pause. You know, I had the strangest feeling the other day. I was making coffee, and I could have sworn I smelled her perfume. Just for a second. That vanilla one she wore. And I thought, Maybe that's how it works. Maybe people don't just disappear. Maybe they get absorbed. I didn't say anything for a moment. That's a nice way to think about it, I said, finally. Is it? She sounded uncertain. Or is it just something we tell ourselves? I looked across my apartment at the jacket on the hook, the mug by the sink, the framed photo on the wall, the bracelet I'd started keeping on the windowsill where it caught the light. I don't think there's a difference, I said. It's June now. 6 months since Rachel disappeared. I've stopped tracking the nighttime episodes. I couldn't tell you when they happen or how often. The boundary between my sleeping and waking hours has become porous in a way that doesn't alarm me anymore. I wake up sometimes at 2 a.m. already dressed, halfway to the door, and instead of fighting it, I let my body complete whatever circuit it needs to complete. Sometimes I'm home before I'm fully conscious. Sometimes I drive the whole route aware, the dark highway unspooling in front of me, and I feel a presence in the passenger seat that is not visible but is undeniably there. Rachel's apartment is almost empty now. Each visit removes something. A towel, a set of measuring cups, the shower curtain, items that have no sentimental value, that no one would think to collect, but that carry the residue of daily life. The ordinary infrastructure of a person who existed. My apartment, correspondingly, is full. Not cluttered. There's no disorder, but every surface holds something of Rachel's alongside something of mine. Her coffee mug next to my coffee mug, her coat next to my coat, her books on my shelf, interleaved with mine. Her towels in my bathroom, her silverware in my drawer. I eat from her plates, I dry my hands on her towels, I fall asleep under a blanket she bought at a Target in Kankakee. And sometimes at night I hear someone breathing. Not in the apartment, not outside the window, closer than that. As though the breathing is coming from inside the walls or inside the furniture or inside me. A second set of lungs operating on a slightly different rhythm, just out of sync with my own. I don't investigate. I don't try to locate the source. I just listen, the way you'd listen to rain. And after a while my breathing adjusts to match it, and the two rhythms merge into one and I sleep. There's one more thing. Last week I was brushing my teeth and glanced at the mirror, and for just a moment less than a second, barely long enough to register my reflection's expression didn't match. I was looking down at the sink. The reflection was looking directly at me. Not with malice, not with anything dramatic, with patience. That same patient expression I'd seen on the camera footage months ago. The look of someone waiting for you to understand something obvious. And there was something else. Something around the eyes, a softness that wasn't mine, a slight asymmetry, the left eye narrower than the right, evaluating, the way Rachel used to look at you when she was figuring out whether you were being honest. It lasted less than a second. Then the reflection was mine again, toothbrush in hand, foam on my lip, just a man standing in a bathroom that smelled like cedar soap and, underneath it, faintly vanilla. I rinsed, I spat, I turned off the light. I went to bed, and as I lay there, in the dark, in an apartment that was half mine and half someone else's, I felt the second breathing begin. Slow and steady, rising from somewhere beneath the floor or within the mattress or behind my own ribs. I closed my eyes and let my breath fall into rhythm with it. It felt like company. It felt like something I'd been missing my whole life and hadn't known I was missing until it arrived. It felt like being watched over. I know I should be frightened. I know the evidence points to something that, viewed from the outside, looks like mental illness or something worse. I know Detective Loomis would not find comfort in this story. I know my mother would weep. I know a doctor would use words like dissociative and fugue and danger to self and others, but they don't feel the breathing. They don't see the way the light catches Rachel's bracelet on the windowsill at exactly the angle where it throws a small, bright rectangle onto the ceiling above my bed. They don't know what it's like to lose someone and then feel them accumulating around you, not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as a presence distributed through the ordinary objects of your life until the line between yours and theirs dissolves and you are, In some way you can't explain and wouldn't want to. Both. I don't know what happened to Rachel. I may never know. The police haven't closed the case, but they've stopped calling. Mom has settled into a grief that has become structural, a permanent feature of her architecture, like a load-bearing wall. She talks about Rachel in the past tense now. Gently, carefully, the way you'd touch a bruise. I don't use the past tense. Last night, I drove to Kankakee. I don't remember deciding to go. I was in bed, and then I was on I-57, and the road was empty, and the sky was black, and the heater was blowing, and Rachel's scarf was on the passenger seat. I let the highway carry me. I didn't think about where I was going or why. I arrived at the duplex, parked in my usual spot, walked to the door, went inside. The apartment was almost bare. The last few things, a bath mat, a kitchen clock, a box of tea bags that had long since gone stale, were waiting. I collected them. I carried them to the car. And before I left, I stood in the empty living room and said, "Okay." The room didn't answer. Rooms don't answer. But the air was warm, warmer than an unheated apartment in a Kankakee winter should be. And for a moment, just a moment, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Not a physical hand. Something lighter, a shift in pressure, the memory of weight. I locked the door behind me. I placed the key under the mat. I drove home. When I got there, I unpacked the last of Rachel's things and put them in their places. The bath mat went in the bathroom. The clock went on the kitchen wall. The tea bags went in the cabinet next to mine. Then I stood in my apartment, our apartment, and I looked at all of it. Every surface, every shelf, and every hook and cabinet and countertop, holding the merged inventory of two lives. I was not alone. I understood in that moment what the nighttime Martin had been trying to tell me, what Rachel had maybe been trying to tell me with her note, with her logs, and with her patience in documenting 2 years of my unconscious devotion, rather than calling the police or changing her locks. She had let me in. Every time. She had heard me at the door, at the window, in the hallway. And she had never once tried to stop me. She had watched me watch over her, and she had waited. And when the time came, when whatever was going to happen happened, she had not resisted. "Can I ask you something weird tomorrow?" She was going to ask me to let her in too, and maybe I did. Maybe the nighttime Martin opened a door that the daytime Martin didn't know existed, and Rachel walked through it, and now she's here. In the cedar soap and the vanilla perfume and the breathing in the walls and the bracelet on the windowsill, and the face in the mirror that isn't quite mine. Or maybe I killed my sister in a dissociative fugue and constructed this entire narrative to avoid the knowledge of what I've done. I don't know. I don't want to know. That's the thing I've realized, the thing that sits at the center of all of this, like a stone at the bottom of a well. I don't want to know. I want the breathing. I want the company. I want the warm air and the presence in the passenger seat and the reflection that sometimes, just sometimes, looks back at me with my sister's eyes. If that makes me dangerous, I'm dangerous. If that makes me sick, I'm sick. But I am not alone. Not anymore. Not ever again. I am going to turn off the lights now. I am going to lie down in our bed, under our blanket, in our apartment. I am going to close my eyes and wait for the second breathing to begin. And when it does, I am going to match it, breath for breath, the way I've been doing for months, until I can't tell where I end and she begins. Tomorrow I'll get up and drive to work and process permits and eat lunch and come home and cook dinner and be Martin. But tonight, in the dark, I'll be something else. Something we are, together. The clock on the kitchen wall. Rachel's clock just ticked past midnight. The apartment is quiet. The street outside is empty. The refrigerator hums its one low note. I can feel the breathing starting. It's warm. I'm going to let it in.